So here we are once again. Let's try to understand a little bit more about two-stroke technology. Horsepower and torque. When you look at that, don't you wonder why the distortion? Why isn't it just linear, going from left to right? Let's try to understand this. Horsepower is torque times RPM divided by 5252. So if you double the RPM, you double the horsepower. Okay? Torque is rotational force, something that you measure on a dyno. As that wheel turns the rotor down here, it registers the torque, and that is computed into horsepower. So if this is your torque right here, and this is your RPM, you can see at 2,000 RPM, you're going to have twice the amount of power. At 3,000 RPM, 3 times the amount. Okay? So what I come to understand is that the baffle wave of the racing expansion chamber is what causes this dip right here. Without a baffle cone, your torque would increase like that. So here's what would happen if your torque would be without this vacant spot. It would go just like that. But then instead of going up here, it would go down like this. So a race bike chooses to have this peak horsepower and just use this section of it right here, being busy with the shift lever, instead of this lower peak horsepower that has much better over here. So for racing, this would be better, but guess what? For trail and for the street, this would be better. So how do you go from this to this? Let's say you're converting a motocross bike to a trail bike. Well, I've got a whole video on that subject. This is my video on the subject, which I explain how the baffle cone interferes with the intake below the pipe power band and helps the power within the pipe power band by increasing the dynamic compression. On this web page on my website is this section out here, and I talk about putting holes in the baffle cone and enclosing that area with another cone. That prohibits the return pressure wave, which is what I did to the pipe on my street bike. The delivery ratio would be something like this, and then it goes drastically down. That's due to lack of blowdown at really high RPM. It delays the transfer of the intake charge into the cylinder at high RPM. So that same graph is right here. And I wanted to show you, these are the return waves from the racing expansion chamber. The diffuser wave is a negative wave that helps to pull in intake charge into the cylinder, and the positive wave helps to increase the dynamic compression. These 3 spikes right here are, as the crank turns, this right here is transfer opening, this is bottom dead center, this is transfer close, and this is exhaust close. The ideal spot for this pressure wave is between transfer closing and exhaust closing. You don't want it on this side because the transfer is open and it connects the cylinder to the crankcase, and that you want that intake charge to flow up into the cylinder through the transfers. So what happens is at low RPM, the baffle wave is in that area, and it causes this dip right here because it restricts the intake. Okay, it stops it after, well, I mean, it's allowed from here to here, and then from here to here it's stopped. So whatever that does, it cuts off 30 to 40% of it. This right here is the pipe power band. The top 25 to 30% of RPM is the pipe power band. And that's when you have the best horsepower. And the beginning of it, this is what the pipe return waves look like. You've got some of the baffle wave here where you want it, but you have some of it here where you don't want it. This right here helps the intake, this right here hinders the intake. So they counterbalance each other, and the peak of that wave should be here, not here at the beginning. But still, this is, as that moves to the right over here, that's the beginning of the pipe power band. This is right in the middle. This is right here. The peak of the horsepower is when the diffuser wave is helping that whole time zone of intake charge going through the transfers into cylinder, and the baffle wave is helping to plug that exhaust port to keep that charge in the cylinder as that piston rises. These graphs come from my pipe calculator, which is a fantastic teaching tool, as well as something that helps you get new designs correct. And this right here is a graph from my porting calculator, which shows the delivery ratio boosted by the results of the two pipe return waves, and the horsepower that's a result of that boosted delivery ratio and the RPM. And you can see it pretty much coincides with what we're seeing in reality right here. So here's what happens. The intake flow goes like this. And if there's enough time from when that transfer opens to when it finally closes the exhaust port, some of that goes out. That's what's represented right here by the red zone. This is the transfer flow, and at 70% of maximum RPM, this is how much is lost out the exhaust port. These are graphs from my porting calculator. At peak horsepower RPM, there's less time. It's a higher RPM than here, just below the pipe power band. And so you have very little lost out the exhaust port. This is from one of the research papers by Gordon Blair and Robert Key. He gives the details of a karting engine and measures the power and the delivery ratio at different RPM. You can see from this graph that the peak of the delivery ratio is about 10,600, and the peak of the power is about 11,750. This red is what I suppose the graph would be if this dip didn't happen. I think that dip is due to a generational return wave in the pipe, which is pretty hard to accurately calculate. This is my latest version of the porting calculator, version 15, and it has the specs for Blair's engine in it. And here on sheet 2 of the same calculator, when I calculate for the power, it peaks like around 11,750. Same as here. And the delivery ratio is peaking around 10,250, which is a little bit less than what it shows right here. It's in the same neighborhood. This version, I've connected it more to the pipe power calculator, so it gives more accurate results. And I'm utilizing the calculation of the waves, you can see the positive section right here is bad for the intake for this section, which is shown right here by cutting off that flow, stopping that flow for that section, which affects the delivery ratio. And this is a new calculation for the porting calculator, which shows the excess, the amount of intake charge lost at the exhaust port. So it's the ratio of the engine size to this blue amount of intake charge, what's not cut off and what's not lost at the exhaust port. And you can see, like I said before, it pretty much V's up and then V's down, and then is affected by the return waves of the pipe. So now we understand what happens to this dip right here, why this is a racing dip. Yamaha made the boost bottle to help counteract that dip, but still a racing pipe causes that dip. The power valve somewhat counteracts this also. When you're coming down from RPM, when you get over here and it flips that valve, you pretty much skip this zone also. So the power valve helps a lot. So we've got a dip here because of the design of the pipe, and we've got a dip right here because of blowdown. Of course, if you raise the exhaust port high enough where you don't have any lack of blowdown at high RPM, then you've actually reduced the size of the engine, and it reduces the whole power. So it's always a give and take thing. You rob Peter to pay Paul. I love this shot. This is a fantastic photo. Marty Smith getting on it with his factory Honda. Pretty much near stock Husqvarna keeping up with them. Yamaha doing fairly well. Suzuki doing fairly well. Look at that Honda. That's awesome. Okay, friends, I think that's enough for now. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks for watching.